I wanted to test my limits, so I invited them. Even saying those words out loud now makes me laugh at myself. Life had been ordinary, almost too ordinary for far too long. My name is Emily Parker. I'm 38 years old, and for years I carried myself as the dependable one, the one who always knew the rules and lived inside them. I had been married to Ryan for 12 years, raising our daughter Claire, working my job at the library, and managing the rhythm of life that was steady and predictable. But predictability, as comforting as it was, started to feel like a cage after a while. It all started last spring when I attended a community retreat on personal growth and boundaries. It was something Ryan had nudged me toward. "You deserve to focus on yourself," he said, his tone genuine but distracted, like always. Ryan was a good man, responsible, loyal, never reckless, but also a man who lived by routine more strictly than anyone I had ever known. Vacations were carefully planned, dinners always served at 6:30 sharp, and conversations followed the same tracks. Somewhere deep inside, I wondered, what would happen if I just shook everything up? The retreat pushed us to think about moments when we felt alive, times when we had pushed ourselves beyond comfort. People shared stories of running marathons, moving to foreign countries, and taking up careers late in life. My story? I couldn't think of one. I realized I had spent my entire life avoiding risk. That night, lying in my hotel bed with the sounds of crickets outside, I wrote in my notebook, "I want to test my limits." Those words felt strange, almost rebellious. What would testing my limits even look like for me? I wasn't going to jump out of airplanes or run across deserts. I wanted something smaller, something that hit me where I lived, socially, emotionally, personally. That's when the idea came. I would invite people into my home. Not just anyone, people I normally kept at a polite distance. My neighbors, acquaintances, even colleagues who I never let pass the surface. I wanted to see how it felt to open myself up, to be vulnerable, to face unpredictable conversations, and maybe even awkward silences. It wasn't about parties or noise. It was about presence, letting others into my world when I had always been so private. The first people I invited were my neighbors, Melissa and James. They lived across the street with their teenage son, and though we exchanged pleasantries often, we never went beyond that. I sent Melissa a simple text, "Would you and James like to come over for dinner this weekend?" Just casual, no reason, just a meal together. She responded within minutes, cheerful and surprised. "We'd love to." When the night came, I set the table with candles even though it wasn't a special occasion. Ryan, skeptical at first, helped me cook spaghetti and roast vegetables. "So we're just having them over for no reason?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "For no reason except I want to," I replied. When Melissa and James arrived, it felt awkward at first. We stumbled over small talk, comparing weather forecasts and schedules. But somewhere between the main course and dessert, something shifted. James began telling stories of his childhood in Ohio, how his father had built furniture by hand, and how he still had a rocking chair in their living room that creaked with every use. Melissa opened up about her struggle to return to work after years of staying home, admitting she felt invisible at times. I found myself confessing things I had never said out loud, how lonely I sometimes felt even in a full house, how much I longed to be spontaneous, how often I doubted whether I was truly living. The conversation ran late into the evening. When they finally left, Melissa hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We needed this more than you know." That hug stayed with me. I realized that by inviting them, I had unlocked something, an honest exchange that went beyond neighborly waves and polite nods. Encouraged, I kept going. The next weekend, I invited my colleague, Sarah, who had always been reserved at work. I knew she lived alone and rarely spoke of her personal life. She surprised me by saying yes. Over cups of tea in my living room, she revealed she was caring for her mother, who was battling dementia. The exhaustion in her eyes was something I recognized, yet she had carried it silently at the office. That night, I listened more than I spoke, and by the time she left, she held my hand and said, "You don't know what it means to be heard." Each invitation became a test. Would I feel judged? Would I be rejected? Would silence choke the air? But each time, the opposite happened. The more people I invited, the more human stories poured into my home. One evening, I invited Daniel and Claire, a young couple from our church. They were newly married, full of energy and laughter. At first, I felt intimidated by their brightness. They asked questions about Ryan and me, how we met, how we kept our marriage strong. For the first time in years, I told the story of how Ryan and I had met at a college bookstore, reaching for the same novel. Sharing that memory in front of others made me fall in love with Ryan's quiet steadiness all over again. He smiled at me that night in a way he hadn't in years. But it wasn't always easy. One night, I invited Mark, an old friend from high school whom I hadn't seen in decades. I remembered him as adventurous, always daring to break the rules. He accepted quickly. But when he arrived, he carried bitterness. He had been through 2 divorces, lost jobs, and spoke with a cynicism that filled the air like smoke. At first, I regretted inviting him. But then I caught myself. This was the test, wasn't it? To face discomfort, to listen without judgment. So I sat with him, asked him questions, and even when his words stung, I let him release them. When he left, he didn't smile, but he said quietly, "Thanks for letting me talk." That night, I realized testing limits didn't always mean joy. It also meant endurance. The most surprising moment came when I invited my own sister, Laura. We had grown distant after years of misunderstandings and unspoken resentment. She hesitated when I asked her, but eventually she agreed. That evening was tense. We circled around each other with guarded words. Finally, over pie, I said, "Laura, I don't even remember why we're angry anymore. Do you?" Her eyes welled up. "Because you stopped calling," she whispered. That night ended with both of us crying, hugging, and laughing at how stubborn we had been. The wall between us crumbled in one evening. Testing my limits wasn't about thrill-seeking or danger. It was about connection. I learned that vulnerability is its own kind of risk, that opening doors to others can be scarier than skydiving. I had always been afraid of rejection, but the truth is, most people are just waiting for an invitation. By the end of that summer, my home had become a revolving door of laughter, tears, and confessions. Ryan, once hesitant, began to enjoy it too. He even invited his coworkers over one evening, surprising me. Claire, our daughter, sat at the table with us often, her young eyes wide as she soaked in the stories of adults navigating life. She later told me, "Mom, I love how our house feels now. It feels alive." Looking back, I realized that testing my limits wasn't about proving bravery, it was about creating space for authenticity. In a world where everyone hides behind polite smiles and busy schedules, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, "Come in.
Sit down."